Welcome to our recorded lecture on Chapter 11. This is following up our work with Chapter 15 in exchange rates, and I wanted to save this chapter and the next one for last because they're probably the most important ones of the semester, and I want us to make sure that we finished up on something important and also very interesting. This is where we get into policy. We start to talk about what the government can do. And we start to learn about how they can do something and why they may be able to affect the economy. This is a short run theory that we're going to start studying. And remember, the difference between the short run and the long run is in the long run, all markets are in equilibrium. They are there, and if you increase nominal variables such as the money supply, and you think again about my $100 trillion bill, it was just a number. Those are nominal variables. If you increase those in the long run, markets are in equilibrium, and it just results in price increases. You can't affect anything like unemployment rates or the amount of goods and services we produce. You can't do that in the long run. In the short run, and here we are in Chapter 11, in the short run, you can. There's the potential to do that because markets are not in equilibrium. We have broken through the classical dichotomy, and there's no separation between nominal and real variables anymore. And the government and the Federal Reserve Bank can do something. So we're going to start studying that. Now, we're going to talk about the Great Depression for a couple of reasons. One, it really drove home the fact that we may want the government to be doing things in the macroeconomy. And two, prior to the Great Depression, the economic theory kind of backed up the idea that the government shouldn't do anything. The idea was that if businesses produced something, they could sell it. So this was called Say's Law. And the idea was that if you produced something, it was always going to get sold because you could cut the price if nobody bought it, and it would be sold eventually. Now, Say's Law was what people accepted until the Great Depression, and then they realized, well, maybe businesses won't be able to sell what they make, and if they don't, then they're going to have to lay people off, and if you lay people off, the people aren't going to be buying things, and demand for goods and services is also very important. In fact, that might be the cause of these recessions and here a depression. So we're going to talk about that really quick and then talk about the outcomes afterwards in economic theory. The Great Depression started in 1929 after a boom, after the roaring 20s and stock market booms. It was a global depression, not just in the United States, but spread across the world. The catalyst for it is debated. So the one thing that put us over the tipping point is debated, but we know pretty much the mechanism of what caused us to go from this tipping point, which could have been a moderate economic crisis, to a decade-long depression. We're going to study that right now. But the tipping point could have been international. It could have been had to do with exchange rates. Could have had to do with a lot of things, and that's still being debated. What's not debated is the facts. We had output and unemployment very high levels, and they really didn't return to normal until World War II. There, of course, the government was highly involved in the economy, borrowing money, war bonds, in order to fund a lot of manufacturing of things to, go fight a war in Europe. And so then output and unemployment returned to normal. Unemployment fell. But unemployment was really high prior to the war, the World War II recovery. So here we see the unemployment rates in the Great Depression. So starting in 1929, we see how rapidly unemployment increases. reaching a peak of a little over 20% there. 1934, 33, 34 were the depths of the depression. There was some recovery after that, but then it came back, and we didn't get below 10% until after the World War had started. To put this in comparison, this last recession, we peaked out at 9.8 or 9.9%. I looked at it, they revised that up. Used to be 9.8, now as they say it's 9.9% unemployment rate during the most recent 2007-2009 recession. So it was about half of what it was. And it only peaked out at that level for a couple of years. Here we see the unemployment rates being between 15 and 20% for almost a decade. So this was a severe depression, severe, long-lasting economic downturn. And what we're going to study are the reasons that we give in explaining why it lasted so long. Kind of to illustrate again the consequences of this massive downturn in the economy, we see these things called Hoovervilles emerging all over the country. I believe this one was in Portland. There's ones in every major city during this time period. These are the homeless, and they're allowed to set up shelters with anything that they can find in certain areas called Hoovervilles, named after President Hoover, who was catching a lot of the blame for the Great Depression. Now, if you can take a look here, these cities, they look like very rundown areas that you would find in developing economies, and this was the state of the country in this time period. It was not what you would expect from one of the world's most industrialized economies. Okay, now we're back to talking about the causes of the Great Depression. What's interesting about this question is that what we're really asking is what caused the economic downturn to become a depression. And we have an answer to that, and we're going to spend some time learning about that. Sometimes you'll hear people say that we don't really know what caused the Great Depression. They're often referring to the triggers or catalysts that caused the economic downturn. There is some debate about that, whether it had to do with trying to stay on the gold standard, and there's some international currency issues going on between the UK and the United States and the gold standard. There was also the stock market boom in 29 and a possible bubble, actually a most definite bubble in the stock market, and that collapsed. All these things would have caused a recession, for sure, but what caused a decade-long depression? Well, that had to do with the way the economy is structured and the way macro economies work. And out of the Great Depression, we developed this theory, and now it is the mainstream theory still in macroeconomics as far as the short run is concerned. This is the mainstream theory, and it's Keynesianism. The idea with Keynesianism has to do with putting an emphasis on demand. Before the Great Depression, before Keynesianism, we felt that if businesses produced something, they would sell it. If they needed to cut the price, they would, but they would sell the items that they produced. And this was called Say's Law. After the Depression, we realized you also need demand. So Keynesianism adds that side of things and notes that there can be a fall in the demand for goods and services. And if that occurs, well, businesses won't be able to sell what they produce. And the reason they won't be able to sell what they produce is because they can't necessarily automatically cut prices. We don't shift a line and magically, immediately cut prices. There are costs associated with that in reality. So Keynesianism was the first to put an emphasis on that and therefore explain how a fall in demand wouldn't just lead to lower prices, it would lead to lower production, lower levels of production. And that sets off a cycle, a downward cycle. So these aggregate expenditures fall. Aggregate expenditures were a new concept at the time, and they measured the level of overall consumer spending and corporate spending in the economy. I should add government spending to that too. We'll define this when we come back to class and graph it, and so talk a lot about aggregate expenditures. It's certainly an important concept, but this was Keynes's idea. And those aggregate expenditures fall. There's a downward spiral of falling demand then, and then of course businesses, if they're not selling items, then they're not going to need people working, and they'll lay people off, and then there'll be even lower demand. And it cycles. So John Maynard Keynes was the architect of this new macroeconomics. He was in England. Now he's Sir John Maynard Keynes. He was knighted afterwards. And he was a notable economist before the Great Depression. He actually came up with the forms and ways of measuring GDP. So these categories of C plus I plus G plus net exports, he created that identity and developed ways to measure those components of GDP. And so after he had done this and the Great Depression was occurring, he set out to write a book, and he told his colleagues that this was going to be big. He knew that this was going to be important as he was writing it. And everyone was really excited for this book to come out. They knew Keynes and knew how brilliant he was, and the General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money was released in 1936. It was an immediate success and had an immediate impact on the policies during the Great Depression and how to get out of the Great Depression. So the model that we look at then, the Keynesian model, focuses on demand, and again, it's a short run, so businesses can't immediately cut their prices. So we can rephrase that idea as saying that firms choose their prices and then they accept the demand for what it is. So in any period of time, firms pick their price. They don't necessarily know what demand is going to be following that, but they will sell what they can at that price. And it may be more, or maybe less than what they had hoped, but they can't instantaneously cut their prices. In the short run, they can't. In the long run, they can, but not in the short run. So just can't immediately cut those prices. And just kind of reiterating things, you just produce what you can and can try to sell at that price. So why then can't we change prices? Well, we mentioned this before. We have to mention it again here because this is why. We have this model where demand falling can lead to a downward spiral, and it's because it's costly for businesses to cut prices. Menu costs are an old term. Menu costs, they refer to the cost of replacing new menus just to change the price of the items. And that's a fairly moderately small cost for a restaurant, but it is a cost. And we use this term based upon that idea. These costs can be fairly large. They can involve having the need to renegotiate contracts, especially with labor. This happens very often. There's the need to renegotiate contracts with the companies that supply your inputs. So you need to renegotiate contracts with these factors of production, your labor, and any inputs that go into producing things. Those tend to be long-term contracts. And there's changing your market price. You can't just, especially if you're a large company, randomly pick any price. You have to know what you're doing, and you don't want to guess. This takes a large amount of effort, and you're going to want to hire some really smart people, really expensive people, to have them figure out what you should charge as a price. So all these things go into the menu costs. And so to change a price, it costs you money. So if you're trying to maximize your profits, it may be profitable not to change your price. So then what happens if you can't cut prices and you're not going to sell everything that you produce? Then this opens the door up for inventory adjustments. So inventories, I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with that, but you can imagine a warehouse where businesses are keeping any excess items that they didn't sell. And when they don't sell, inventories increase. Now businesses are going to see that and react accordingly. They're not just going to continue to ramp up production and keep on producing more and more and more stuff as they're failing to sell it and their inventories are increasing. Businesses will monitor their inventories, and if their inventories rise, they're going to slow production, lay people off. Conversely, if their inventories fall, they'll be able to hire some more people and increase their production. So again, these inventories fluctuate with this aggregate changes in aggregate demand. When demand is higher than expected, inventories are going to fall. To see how the inventory adjustments affect our level of output, let's go ahead and go back and look at our GDP function again. So y equals c plus I plus g plus net exports. And, well, what we're going to do is have something that looks a lot like the GDP function, and we're going to call it planned aggregate expenditure. This is getting at the demand side of things. And so GDP, our capital Y up there, is going to represent output, whereas planned aggregate expenditure is going to represent what happens when our demand may be different from the level of output. So let's look at what planned aggregate expenditure is. It looks a lot like GDP, actually. We have the same here, consumption, level of consumption in there. We're going to, again, when we get back from into class, we're going to expand this C here, and it's going to have its own function. This C is going to have its own function. And we'll see how this may shift, and it's going to shift planned aggregate expenditure. But we'll get there later on. Otherwise, this is the same C that's up there in the real GDP. This is what's going to be different, the planned investment, but then you see the rest of planned aggregate expenditure is just G and net exports, just like our GDP. Now we have this planned investment. Our planned investment may be different from actual investment because the actual investment will reflect inventory adjustments. So planned investment is the level of purchases of new physical capital, but now we're interested in inventories and the planned level of inventory. So people expect to have the same amount of inventories that they did last year. That's going to be that expectation, that planned amount is going to be in planned investment. And then if, for instance, inventories increase and are above where they were last year, so in effect they're wrong in their planning, well then I and our Y there, the real GDP, is going to be above the planned expenditure. So it's going to need to fall down eventually, right? We're going to have too much inventory in our I, and businesses will eventually reduce their output. Y will fall, and these two will eventually be equal, actually. So we have this relationship: the planned aggregate expenditure is equal to C plus I, superscript P here, planned aggregate expenditure, planned investment. That's what makes it planned aggregate expenditure. And then G in net exports. So we're interested in these points where Y may be less than planned aggregate expenditure. This occurs when investments fall. So the actual I will be lower, and this is falling due to inventories. So if inventories fall, investments fall, and then real GDP is going to be less than planned aggregate expenditure. So conversely, there's also our points where real GDP is greater than planned aggregate expenditure. This is where we will see actual inventories greater than what was planned. So this occurs after prices are chosen. Businesses try to be accurate, but there's always going to be some kind of short-term shock that occurs, and that's going to affect aggregate demand. So aggregate demand is, again, we're interested in how the actual level of investment compares to the planned level, and the difference is going to come through changes in inventories, where if inventories are greater, I will be greater than planned investment. So, prices then are chosen in their what's going to happen is they're going to correspond to the level of planned investment. But this may not be accurate, or at least they may not result in the desired level. The level of investment could be too high because inventories are picking up. Okay, so just to recap everything and mainly make the point about the role of inventories. These are essential to understanding what's going on in the Keynesian model. They are included in investment. If you don't sell something and your inventories go up, well, it's been produced, so we didn't sell it though. It's not going to be in consumption, it's not going to be in G, and it's not going to be part of net exports. Nobody bought it. But we're just going to add it to our inventories then. We're going to add it to our investment. It is future sales. So we'll sell it in the future, but we add it to our real GDP now in the form of inventories. And then when they sell it, those inventories will fall and investment will fall. So it will net out that way once they're sold. But in the meantime, when they're not sold, inventories go up, and that's added to our investment. So firm doesn't sell something, it's added to inventories. What happens is that the I, actual level investments, increase, and then we're going to have our planned investment being less than I. So if a firm sells more than it planned, its inventories are going to decrease. This is the other side of things. Things are going well. Aggregate expenditure is increasing. Its inventories decrease. So I decreases, and then we have this relationship where the actual investment's less than the planned. And if this occurs, then what will happen is that firms will need to increase their output to meet this excess demand. Okay, so this is about it to these slides. Go ahead and make sure you've answered all these questions and hang on that sheet that will be used to help you prep for the final. So we're going to pick up from here. We're going to incorporate inventories into our models of the short run macroeconomy and be able to explain recessions and what the government can do.